Okay, so today what we're going to work on is graphing sine and cosine. So I would like you to put me on pause, try this, fill in the chart, and then we're going to sketch a graph of the sine and cosine curve. All right, so put me on pause and come back. Okay, so we have, I want to change my degrees to radians. So 0 degrees is 0 radians. 90 degrees is pi over 2. 180 degrees is pi. 270 degrees is 3 pi over 2. And 360 is 2 pi. All right, now sine of 0 degrees, or 0 radians, is 0, right? So we should know that from the unit circle. Sine of 90 degrees is 1. Sine of 180 degrees is 0. Sine of 270 degrees is -1, and sine of 360 is 0. Okay, so now we're going to graph this. Okay, so this will be my theta, this will be my y. So my y values are going up to 1 and down to -1, so I need 1, -1. And then I need, this is 0 here. So notice I have these 4 important points now I need to graph, because I already graphed 0. So I have pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. Okay, so for 0 degrees, my y value is 0. Pi over 2 is 1. Pi is 0. 3 pi over 2 is -1. And 2 pi is 0. So this is a curve. It's not going to be pointed at the top. It's rounded. It's like hills and valleys. So that's my sine curve. So notice that the sine curve, look where it starts. It started right here in the middle. Okay, it started right in the middle here. And then it went up, came back down, hit the x-axis. And then came down to a min and came back up and hit the axis again. All right, so there's these 4 important points here. Max, min, and where it hits the x-axis. Notice that the sine curve looks like a sideways S. S for sine. Okay, so let's go over to cosine. So we did 0 degrees is 0 radians. 90 degrees is pi over 2. 180 is pi. 270 is 3 pi over 2. And 360 is 2 pi. So cosine of 0 degrees is 1. Cosine of 90 is 0. Cosine of 180 is -1. Cosine of 270 is 0. And cosine of 360 is 1. Okay, so let's graph that. So that's going up to 1 and down to -1. And I have my 0 here. And then I have 4 points, so I need pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. Okay, so now let's graph it. At 0 radians, I have a 1. At pi over 2 radians, it's 0. At pi, it's -1. 3 pi over 2 is 0, and 2 pi, we're back up to 1. So this is a curve too. One is just a shift of the other. So notice that for cosine, I actually start up at my max. So I start at my max, I go down, I hit the axis, I go down to my min, and then I start back up again, hit the axis, and back up to my maximum. Okay, so for your curves, there are 4 important points in the curve. So in the curve here, so not counting where it starts on the x-axis, so in here there's 4 important points. The max where it hits the x-axis, and it's min. And the same thing here. In your curve, there's 4 important points where it hits the axis, and it's max, and it's min. But not where it starts, because we know it's going to start on the axis. Okay? So, graphing sine and cosine using the slash method. So I just said there are 4 important points. There's 4 important slashes. To find the number of slashes, it's 4 times the number of cycles you have. And then to find what your scale is going to be, what you're going to label each slash mark, it's 2 pi, the whole interval, divided by the number of slashes. Okay, so let's take a look at let's graph on the bottom here. All right, so it says, let's graph y is equal to sine 2x, and I'm graphing from 0 to 2 pi. So we first have to find the amplitude. So my amplitude would be the absolute value of 1, which is equal to 1. The number of cycles is the absolute value of 2, which is 2. My period is 2 pi over b, remember, which is 2. Remember, this is b, this is a, the absolute value. So, which is pi. So remember, period is the interval where you see one complete curve. So I will have 2 curves, and each curve will end at an interval of 2 pi. All right, my number of slashes is 4 times b, which is 4 times 2, which is 8. So I'm going to have 8 slashes. And your x scale is 2 pi divided by 8. So you're going to reduce that to pi over 4. Okay, so we're going to label the axes here. So I'm going up and down to 1. So 1 and negative 1. I need 8 slashes. Try to make them equally spaced apart. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Your first slash is going to be labeled, that's your x scale, pi over 4. So what that means is that each interval here, each piece is representing pi over 4. So the first one is pi over 4. Now I need another pi over 4, which is going to put me at 2 pi over 4. And then another pi over 4, which is 3 pi over 4. And then 4 pi over 4, which is pi. And then 5 pi over 4. 6 pi over 4. You don't have to reduce these. 7 pi over 4. 8 pi over 4, which is 2 pi, which makes sense. I'm graphing from 0 to 2 pi. So it's going to be 0 here to 2 pi. All right, it is a sine curve, and it's going to start at 0. So that's your first point. Now remember, sine starts at the line that it's going up and down around. So from here, it's going to go up, and it's going to go up to its max. So at pi over 4, I'm going to be at my max. Once I'm at my max, I have to go back down now. So at 2 pi over 4, I have to hit the axis. Have to hit the axis before I go down to my min. So at 3 pi over 4, I'm going to be down at my min. Once I'm at my min, I have to go back up. So at pi, I'm going to hit the axis. I'll go up to my max at 5 pi over 4. Once I'm at my max, I have to go back down. So I have to hit the axis first at 6 pi over 4. And then go down to my min at 7 pi over 4. And then go back up at 2 pi and hit the axis. And now you're going, ooh. That did not look too good. Okay, so now let's draw the curve. Nice. Okay, so there's your graph. All right, so let's flip it over and we'll try a couple on the back. Okay, so we're going to graph y is equal to cosine 1/2 x. And we're graphing from 0 to 2 pi. So my amplitude is the absolute value of 1, which is equal to 1. Number of cycles is the absolute value of a half, which is a half. Sorry, my stylus is not working too well. My period is 2 pi divided by b, which is a half. So 2 pi divided by a half would be 4 pi. It's not half of 2, which is 1. It's 2 divided by a half. The number of slashes is going to be 4 times a half, which is 2. And my x scale is going to be 2 pi over 2, which is pi. Okay, so let's see what we have here. My amplitude is 1, which means it's going up and down to 1. The number of cycles, you're going to have half of a cycle in an interval of 2 pi. My period, so if I have half a cycle in 2 pi, that means I need a full cycle will give me to 4 pi. Number of slashes, 2 slashes, and my x scale is going to be pi. All right, so I'm going up and down to 1, negative 1. I need 2 slashes, 1, 2, so it's going to be pi and 2 pi. All right, so it is a cosine curve, so cosine starts up at its max, so it'll start up here. Once it's at its max, it has to come back down and hit the axis, so at pi, it'll hit the axis. And then it's going to go down to its min, so at 2 pi, it'll be at its min. So it'll look like this. And that should make sense. It says that I should have half a cycle in 2 pi. That's half of a cosine cycle. Because if I need to continue, it's going to come back up like this. And then it would end at 4 pi, because this would be 3 pi. Okay, so we're just looking at this piece right in here. Okay, so let's look at the next one. So pull it down. Okay, so we're graphing, we're graphing y is equal to negative 3 cosine x, and we're graphing from now, notice the interval, negative pi to pi. All right, so my amplitude is the absolute value of negative 3, which is 3. So that means we're going up to 3 and down to 3. The number of cycles is the absolute value of 1, which is 1, which means I have one cycle, one complete curve in 2 pi. The period is 2 pi over 1, which is 2 pi, which means I will see one complete cycle every 2 pi. The number of slashes is 4 times 1, which is 4. And my x scale would be 2 pi over 4, which would be pi over 2. All right, so now since I'm graphing from negative pi to pi, that's still, the whole thing from negative pi to pi, that's still a 2 pi interval. But I'm only going pi on one side and a pi on the other side. So that does not mean you double your slashes, right? Because the slash is for an interval of 2 pi. That means I have to put 2 on one side and 2 on the other side. So so it'd be pi over 1, 2. So it'd be pi over 2 and pi. And then it'd be negative pi over 2 and negative pi. So it's going up to 3 and down to negative 3. All right, it is cosine. Now, since we have a negative, this is what we do when we have a negative. Instead of starting up at its max, you're going to start down at your min. And it's the same thing with sine. If it was a sine curve, instead of going up to its max, it would go down to its min. So if I'm at my min, I have to go up and hit the x-axis and then go up to my max. Now you have to go on the other side. So I'm at my min here. So I have to hit the x-axis and then go up to my max. So it'll look like this. Okay, so that's it, and we'll practice in class. Have a good night.